A wealthy father believed his son was deaf for 8 years, but a 7-year-old girl revealed a secret that changed everything. What was the boy hiding behind his silence? Like and comment below. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as Marcus Wellington sat on his usual bench, watching his 8-year-old son Thomas with a mixture of love and heartbreak. Every day for the past 3 years, they came to this same spot, hoping against hope that something might spark a response from the boy who lived in complete silence. Thomas sat perfectly still on the grass, surrounded by expensive toys that his father brought each morning: remote-controlled cars, building blocks, colorful books with moving parts. None of them ever captured his attention for more than a few seconds. The specialists had been clear: profound hearing loss present since birth. No amount of wealth could buy back what his son had never had. "Another beautiful day, isn't it, Thomas?" Marcus said softly, knowing his words fell on deaf ears. The boy's dark hair caught the sunlight as he stared ahead with those same distant eyes that had haunted Marcus's dreams for years. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Dr. Richardson's name. The audiologist had been their latest hope, recommended by colleagues as the best in the state. The appointment was scheduled for next week, though Marcus had little faith left. How many specialists had they seen? 15, 20, each one delivering the same devastating news with clinical precision. "Mr. Wellington," a gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Janet Morrison, a regular at the park who often walked her golden retriever in the mornings. She was a kind woman in her 50s, a retired teacher who had always shown interest in Thomas's condition. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "How's Buddy today?" "Oh, he's wonderful as always," she said, watching as her dog sniffed around the playground equipment. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but how is Thomas doing with his new therapy program?" Marcus's smile faltered slightly. We're trying a new approach next week. Dr. Richardson comes highly recommended." Mrs. Morrison nodded sympathetically. "I've seen you both here almost every morning for years, that kind of dedication. Thomas is lucky to have you." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife, Sarah, she died when he was just 2. She used to say that love would be enough, that somehow we'd find a way to reach him. But it's been 6 years, and I still feel like I'm failing him every single day." Before Mrs. Morrison could respond, a commotion erupted near the playground. A young woman was calling out frantically, "Sophia! Sophia! Where are you?" Marcus looked toward the sound and saw a woman in her early 30s, clearly distressed, searching around the swings and slides. She was dressed simply but neatly, with the tired look of someone who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. "Excuse me," the woman called to anyone who would listen. "Has anyone seen a little girl, 7 years old, dark hair, wearing a yellow dress?" Marcus stood up instinctively. "How long has she been missing?" "Just a few minutes, but she's never wandered off like this before," the woman replied, her voice shaking with worry. "We come here every Saturday morning and she always stays close to me." Mrs. Morrison joined them. "I'm sure she's just exploring. Children do that. Let's help you look." As they organized a search of the immediate area, Marcus glanced back at Thomas, who remained motionless on the grass. For a moment, he considered staying with his son, but something about the mother's desperation touched him deeply. Perhaps it was the memory of his own fears, the constant worry that something might happen to Thomas. "Thomas, stay right here, okay?" he said, knowing the words were meaningless to his son, but saying them anyway. "I'll be back in just a moment." They spread out across the park, calling Sophia's name. Marcus headed toward the duck pond, a popular spot for children. As he rounded a cluster of oak trees, He heard something that made him freeze in place. Laughter. Not just any laughter, but the unmistakable sound of children playing together. He followed the sound to a secluded area behind the trees where a small clearing opened up near the water's edge. What he saw there defied everything he thought he knew about his son. Thomas was sitting cross-legged on the grass, face to face with a little girl in a yellow dress. But they weren't just sitting together. They were communicating. The girl would make intricate hand gestures, not sign language, but something more elaborate and personal. Thomas would respond with his own movements, his face more animated than Marcus had ever seen it. Most shocking of all, Thomas was making sounds, not words, but melodic humming, perfectly timed with the girl's gestures. It was as if they were having a complete conversation in a language only they understood. Marcus's heart pounded as he watched from behind the trees, afraid that any sudden movement would shatter this impossible moment. This had to be Sophia, the missing girl. But how had she found Thomas? More importantly, how was Thomas responding to her? The girl, Sophia, suddenly gestured toward the trees where Marcus was hiding. Thomas turned his head in that direction, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw his son's eyes focused directly on him. There was intelligence there, awareness, and something that looked almost like guilt. Sophia stood up quickly, brushing off her yellow dress. She made one final gesture to Thomas, who nodded solemnly, then she ran toward Marcus. "Are you my daddy's friend?" she asked, tilting her head with innocent curiosity. "Your mother is looking for you," Marcus managed to say, his mind reeling from what he'd witnessed. "She's very worried." "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make her scared," Sophia said with genuine remorse. "I just saw the sad boy and wanted to help him feel better." Marcus looked back at Thomas, who had returned to his usual motionless state, staring ahead as if nothing had happened. But Marcus knew what he'd seen. His son wasn't as unreachable as everyone believed. As Sophia ran toward her mother's voice, calling out, "Mama, I'm here!" Marcus remained frozen in place, watching his son with new eyes. Everything he thought he knew about Thomas had just been shattered by a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress. When he finally approached Thomas, the boy didn't acknowledge him, returning to the familiar pattern that had defined their relationship for 8 years. But now, Marcus knew it was an act. The question was, why? The next morning, Marcus arrived at Riverside Park 30 minutes earlier than usual, hoping to encounter Sophia and her mother again. He'd barely slept, replaying the scene from yesterday over and over in his mind. The image of Thomas communicating, actually engaging with another person, seemed too extraordinary to be real. Thomas walked beside him silently, his small hand in Marcus's, showing no sign that yesterday had been anything other than ordinary. They settled on their usual bench, and Marcus found himself studying his son's face more intently than ever before. "Thomas," he said quietly, "yesterday, when you were with that little girl." He paused, searching for any flicker of recognition in the boy's eyes. Nothing. Thomas stared ahead with the same vacant expression that had become heartbreakingly familiar. 15 minutes passed before Marcus spotted them. Sophia skipped alongside her mother near the playground, her yellow dress replaced by a simple blue sweater and jeans. The woman, who Marcus now assumed was named Elena based on what he'd overheard yesterday, looked more relaxed today, keeping a closer eye on her daughter while allowing her some freedom to explore. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He stood up, gently taking Thomas's hand. "Come on, son, let's go for a walk." They strolled casually toward the playground, Marcus's heart racing with anticipation. As they drew closer, Sophia noticed them first. Her face lit up with recognition, and she tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing in their direction. "Mama, that's the sad boy I told you about," Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Elena turned, and Marcus saw her tense slightly. He understood her reaction. A wealthy man approaching with his child could seem suspicious, especially to a single mother who appeared to be struggling financially. "Good morning," Marcus called out, trying to sound casual. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied cautiously, placing a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I'm Marcus Wellington," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "This is my son, Thomas. I believe your daughter met him yesterday." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Oh, you're Sophia's new friend's father. She mentioned a boy who seemed sad." Sophia looked up at her mother earnestly. "Mama, he's not really sad inside. He just can't tell people because of the secret." Marcus felt his breath catch. What secret? But Sophia had already broken free from her mother's grasp and was approaching Thomas. Elena started to call her back, but Marcus held up a gentle hand. "It's okay. Thomas doesn't mind other children. He's just shy." What happened next was even more remarkable than yesterday. Sophia stood directly in front of Thomas and made a complex series of hand movements, almost like a dance. Thomas remained still for a moment, then slowly, almost reluctantly, responded with his own gestures. "How does she know how to communicate with him?" Marcus asked Elena, his voice filled with wonder. Elena looked puzzled. "I don't understand. Sophia doesn't know sign language. Where did she learn those movements?" "He taught me," Sophia said simply, overhearing their conversation while maintaining her gestural dialogue with Thomas. "But it's not hand-talking like on TV. It's heart-talking." "Heart-talking?" Marcus repeated. Sophia nodded seriously. "When people are hurt inside, they sometimes make up special ways to talk that only other hurt people can understand." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, hurt inside?" Before Sophia could answer, Eleanor intervened. "Sophia, sweetheart, we should let these nice people have their private time." "But Mama, the daddy doesn't know about the secret yet," Sophia protested. "Thomas wants to tell him, but he's scared." Marcus knelt down to Sophia's level, his hands trembling slightly. "What secret, Sophia? What is Thomas scared of?" Sophia looked at Thomas, who had gone completely still again. She made one more gesture, and Marcus could swear he saw his son give an almost imperceptible nod. "He's not deaf, Mr. Daddy," Sophia said quietly. "He just pretends because he thinks if he talks, something bad will happen." The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. "What do you mean he's not deaf? The doctors—" "Sophia!" Elena said sharply, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "We really should go now." But Marcus couldn't let them leave. "Not now. Please, Eleanor, I need to understand. How does your daughter know this?" Elena hesitated, studying Marcus's face. She must have seen the desperate hope there, because her expression softened. Sophia has always been perceptive about people's emotions, sometimes too perceptive. She says things that seem impossible, but they turn out to be true, Marcus finished. Elena nodded reluctantly. "More often than I'd like to admit." Sophia tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Mr. Daddy, Thomas remembers things from when he was little, scary things that happened when people talked." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What kind of scary things?" Sophia looked at Thomas again, who had begun to rock slightly back and forth, a behavior Marcus had never seen before. "He remembers the night his mama went away," Sophia whispered. "There was lots of yelling and crying, and after that, whenever people talked loud or got upset, bad things happened. So he decided to stop listening and stop talking, because maybe then the bad things would stop too." Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. Sarah's death hadn't been peaceful. She'd been sick for months, and toward the end there had been arguments with doctors, desperate phone calls in the middle of the night, moments of panic and raised voices as they fought to save her life. Thomas had been there for some of it, a 2-year-old child, witnessing his world fall apart. "The doctors said he was born deaf," Marcus said weakly. Sometimes grown-ups see what they expect to see, Sophia said with wisdom far beyond her 7 years. Thomas got really good at pretending. But pretending is hard work, and sometimes when he meets other kids who understand about being scared, he forgets to pretend. Marcus looked at his son, who was still rocking, his eyes squeezed shut as if trying to block out the conversation. For the first time, Marcus wondered if what he'd interpreted as symptoms of deafness might actually have been symptoms of trauma. "Thomas," Marcus said softly, his voice breaking. "Son, can you hear me?" The rocking stopped. Thomas opened his eyes and looked directly at his father. For a moment that lasted an eternity, father and son stared at each other across 8 years of misunderstanding. Then Thomas did something that shattered Marcus's heart and put it back together simultaneously. He opened his mouth and spoke his first word in 6 years. "Daddy!" The word hung in the air like a miracle, fragile and precious. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he stared at his son, who had spoken for the first time since he was 2 years old. But almost immediately, Thomas seemed to realize what he'd done, and panic flooded his small features. "No, no, no," Thomas whispered, his hands flying to cover his mouth. "I wasn't supposed to. I can't. The bad things will come back." Marcus reached out instinctively, but Thomas flinched away, curling into himself on the grass. The sight of his son in such distress broke something inside Marcus that he didn't know could break any further. "Thomas, it's okay," Marcus said gently, forcing his voice to remain calm despite the emotional earthquake happening inside him. "Nothing bad is going to happen." But Thomas was shaking his head violently, rocking again. "Mama got sick because I was loud. The doctors came because I cried. Everyone was upset because I wouldn't be quiet." Sophia, who had been watching with wide, compassionate eyes, sat down cross-legged in front of Thomas. She made a slow, soothing gesture with her hands, and Thomas's rocking gradually slowed. "Thomas," she said in her clear, young voice, "the bad things weren't because you talked. Sometimes bad things just happen, like when it rains, even when we want to play outside." Eleanor, who had been standing frozen in shock, finally found her voice. "Mr. Wellington, I think we should call someone, a doctor or—" "No doctors," Thomas said sharply, looking up with fear in his eyes. "Please, Daddy, no more doctors." Marcus felt his heart clench. How many medical appointments had he dragged Thomas to over the years? How many strangers had poked and prodded and tested his son, all while Thomas understood every word they said about him? The boy had been protecting himself the only way he knew how, by disappearing into silence. "Okay, no doctors today," Marcus promised, sitting down on the grass so he was at Thomas's eye level. "But son, I need you to help me understand. All these years you could hear everything?" Thomas nodded miserably. "I heard you crying at night. I heard you talking to Grandma on the phone about how broken I was. I heard you tell Mrs. Rodriguez that you wished Mama was here because she would know how to fix me." Each confession hit Marcus like a physical blow. All those private moments of grief and frustration, all those conversations he'd thought were safe to have because his son couldn't hear them, Thomas had absorbed every word. "You were never broken," Marcus said fiercely. "Thomas, you were never broken. I was just scared and sad and I didn't know how to help you. But I made Mama sick," Thomas insisted, his voice getting smaller. "She was fine until I was born, and then she got the bad sickness and died." Marcus realized with horrible clarity what had happened. Thomas had somehow connected his birth with Sarah's illness, despite the fact that her autoimmune disease had developed when Thomas was a toddler. In his child's mind, he'd created a narrative where his existence had caused his mother's death. "Thomas, look at me," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear. "Your mama didn't get sick because of you. She got sick because sometimes people's bodies stop working the right way. It had nothing to do with you being born, or talking, or crying, or anything you did." Sophia reached out and gently touched Thomas's hand. My abuela had the sugar sickness and went to heaven when I was 5. My mama cried a lot, but she told me it wasn't because I was bad. Sometimes people just have to go be angels, even when we want them to stay. Thomas looked between Sophia and Marcus, confusion and hope warring in his expression. But if I hadn't cried that last night, maybe the doctors could have helped her better. Everyone was so upset, and the machines were beeping, and you were 2 years old, Marcus interrupted gently. 2-year-olds cry when they're scared. That's normal, Thomas. That's what children do. But after she died, you were so sad, Thomas whispered. Every time I made noise, you got sadder. So I thought if I stopped making noise, maybe you'd be happy again. The full weight of Thomas's sacrifice hit Marcus like a tidal wave. For 6 years his son had lived in self-imposed silence, believing that his voice was somehow dangerous, that his words could cause pain and loss. He'd given up one of the most fundamental parts of being human because he thought it would protect the people he loved. "Oh, Thomas," Marcus breathed, finally reaching out to cup his son's face in his hands. This time Thomas didn't pull away. "You beautiful, brave, impossible boy, you've been protecting me all this time, haven't you?" Thomas nodded, tears spilling over. "I didn't want you to be sad anymore. I didn't want anyone else to go away." Marcus pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight against his chest. Thomas was stiff at first, as if he'd forgotten how to accept comfort, but gradually he melted into his father's embrace. "I was sad because I missed Mama," Marcus said into Thomas's hair, "and I was sad because I thought I was losing you too. But Thomas, your voice never caused sadness. Your voice is the most beautiful thing in the world to me." They held each other in the middle of the park while Sophia and Elena watched respectfully from a few feet away. Marcus could feel 8 years of walls crumbling, 8 years of distance closing in an instant. "Will you try talking to me again?" Marcus asked carefully. "Not because you have to, but because I love hearing your voice." Thomas pulled back to look at his father, studying his face intently. "What if something bad happens?" "Then we'll handle it together," Marcus promised. "But Thomas, I don't think anything bad will happen. I think wonderful things are going to happen now that you're not carrying this heavy secret all by yourself." Thomas glanced at Sophia, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then, in a voice rusty from years of disuse but growing stronger with each word, he said, "I love you, Daddy. I missed talking to you." Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of those words. When he opened them again, he saw that Elena was crying too, and Sophia was clapping her hands together with pure joy. But as the initial shock and emotion began to settle, Marcus realized that this revelation, as miraculous as it was, opened up a whole new set of questions. Thomas had been evaluated by dozens of specialists over the years. How had none of them detected that he could actually hear? And what did this mean for his son's future? Most importantly, what other secrets might Thomas be hiding behind 8 years of carefully constructed silence? As if reading his thoughts, Sophia tugged on Elena's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. Elena's expression grew troubled, and she looked at Marcus with what appeared to be reluctance mixed with concern. "Mr. Wellington," Elena said carefully, "Sophia says there's something else about Thomas that you need to know, something about why he chose to talk today, specifically." Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. "What do you mean?" Sophia stepped forward, her young face serious. "Thomas didn't just decide to talk because he felt safe. He talked because he's scared about something that's going to happen soon, something he thinks might hurt you." Marcus looked down at Thomas, who had gone very still in his arms. "What is it, son? What are you afraid of?" Thomas looked up at his father with eyes full of secrets and said words that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about their life together. "Daddy, the people who come to our house when you're at work, They're not really there to help me. They're there because of something else. Something about Mama's money that someone doesn't want you to find out." The park suddenly felt very quiet around them, as if the world was holding its breath for what would come next. 4. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as Thomas's words sank in. "What people, Thomas? What do you mean they're not there to help you?" Thomas glanced nervously at Sophia and Eleanor before looking back at his father. "The lady with the red hair who comes on Tuesdays, and the man with the glasses who brings the papers for you to sign. They think I can't hear them, so they talk about things when you're not there." Marcus's mind raced. Margaret Chen, his estate attorney, came by regularly to handle various legal matters related to Sarah's inheritance, and Dr. Peterson, the family psychologist, visited weekly for what Marcus thought were therapeutic sessions with Thomas. Both had assured him they were working in Thomas's best interests. "What kind of things do they talk about?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Thomas hugged his knees to his chest. "The red-hair lady tells the glasses man that you're spending too much money on my doctors. She says if you keep going to so many specialists, there won't be enough left for the real beneficiaries. And the glasses man always says the boy doesn't need to know about the trust modifications." Elena stepped closer, her maternal instincts clearly activated. "Mr. Wellington, this sounds like something you should investigate immediately." Sophia nodded solemnly. "When grown-ups whisper about money and say kids don't need to know, it usually means they're doing something sneaky." Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest. Sarah had left a substantial inheritance in trust for Thomas, with Marcus as the primary trustee. Margaret had been handling the legal aspects, and Dr. Peterson had been supposedly working with Thomas on his communication issues. If they were conspiring to manipulate the trust behind his back. "Thomas, is there anything else they've said? Anything about your mother's will or the trust fund?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Last Tuesday, when you had that long phone call in your office, they thought I was sleeping on the couch. The red-hair lady said something about incompetency proceedings and how much easier everything would be if I stayed the way I was." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Thomas was deemed permanently disabled and unable to inherit, the secondary beneficiaries of Sarah's trust would receive the money instead. Margaret had helped draft the will. She knew exactly who those beneficiaries were. "Who are the secondary beneficiaries, Daddy?" Thomas asked quietly, demonstrating once again that he understood far more than anyone had realized. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Your Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, Sarah's siblings, who had been resentful of her marriage to Marcus from the beginning, claiming he was only after her family's old money. They'd been civil at the funeral, but Marcus had sensed their frustration when they learned most of Sarah's estate was tied up in Thomas's trust until he turned 21. "The red-hair lady talks to them on the phone sometimes," Thomas added. "She always steps outside when she does it, but I can see her through the window. She gets really excited when she talks to them." Eleanor looked shocked. "Are you saying that your attorney and this doctor have been conspiring to keep Thomas appearing disabled so they can redirect his inheritance?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Marcus said grimly, "and if Thomas had never spoken, they might have succeeded." Sophia, who had been listening intently, suddenly grabbed Thomas's hand. "That's why you decided to talk today, isn't it? You knew something bad was going to happen." Thomas nodded. "Yesterday, I heard the red-hair lady tell the glasses man that they were going to ask a judge to make Daddy not be in charge of my money anymore. She said they had enough doctor reports to prove I would never get better." Marcus felt sick. All those specialists he'd taken Thomas to see, all those evaluations and tests. Margaret had probably been collecting every negative report, building a case to have Thomas declared permanently incompetent. And Peterson had likely been filing reports supporting that conclusion. "When is this supposed to happen?" Marcus asked. "Monday," Thomas whispered. "The glasses man said they were filing papers on Monday." Marcus looked at his watch. It was Saturday morning. He had less than 48 hours to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy and protect his son's inheritance. "Thomas, I need you to tell me everything else you've overheard. Every conversation, every phone call, every detail you can remember." "Oh." For the next hour, sitting in the park while Sophia played nearby and Elena kept watch, Thomas recounted 8 years' worth of conversations he'd witnessed while pretending to be deaf. The picture that emerged was even worse than Marcus had imagined. Margaret Chen had been systematically billing excessive fees to the trust, claiming they were necessary expenses for Thomas's care. She'd been in regular contact with Patricia and Robert, updating them on the trust's value and the timeline for potentially redirecting the funds. Dr. Peterson had been filing false reports about Thomas's condition, exaggerating his disabilities and recommending increasingly expensive treatments that he knew would never work. "They think they're so smart," Thomas said with surprising bitterness. "They think because I don't talk, I don't understand. But I've been watching them steal from us for years." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I need to call my brother. David's a federal prosecutor. He'll know how to handle this." "Wait," Elena said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Before you make any calls, you need to think about Thomas's safety. If these people realize he can hear and speak, they might do something desperate to silence him." The thought chilled Marcus to the bone. "You're right. Thomas, have you ever let on that you could hear them?" "No, Daddy, I was too scared. I thought if they knew I could hear, they might hurt you to keep me quiet." Sophia looked up from where she'd been collecting dandelions. "My mama always says the best way to catch sneaky people is to let them think they're still being sneaky while you gather proof." Elena smiled at her daughter's wisdom. "Sophia's right. If you confront them directly, they'll destroy evidence and disappear. But if Thomas continues to appear deaf for just a little while longer, you might be able to record them or catch them in the act." Marcus considered this. It would mean asking Thomas to return to his painful silence, at least temporarily. "Son, would you be willing to pretend for just a few more days? Just until we can gather enough evidence to stop them?" Thomas looked scared, but determined. "If it means protecting you and stopping them from stealing Mama's money, then yes. But I don't want you to feel like you have to be silent anymore," Marcus said firmly. "When we're alone, I want you to talk to me. When we're here in the park with Sophia and Elena, you can be yourself. Only around Margaret and Dr. Peterson do you need to pretend." "And we'll help," Sophia announced, having wandered back over. "Elena works for a security company. She knows about recording devices and stuff." Marcus looked at Elena with surprise. "You work in security?" Elena nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I'm a security consultant for small businesses. I know it doesn't look like much, bringing my daughter to the park on weekends, but I've been building my own company for the past 3 years. I specialize in catching employee theft and corporate fraud." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "Would you be willing to help us? I can pay whatever your usual rate is." "Mr. Wellington," Elena said seriously, "after what I've witnessed today, and knowing that these people have been exploiting a child for 8 years, I wouldn't dream of charging you. This is personal now." Over the next 2 hours, they developed a plan. Elena would install discreet recording devices in Marcus's home office and living room. Thomas would continue his normal routine, but now he'd be actively listening for incriminating conversations. Marcus would document every suspicious financial transaction he could find in the trust records. "There's just one problem," Thomas said as they were preparing to leave the park. "The red-hair lady and the glasses man are coming to the house tomorrow. They think you'll be at your golf tournament all day." Marcus's blood ran cold. He'd completely forgotten about the charity tournament he'd committed to months ago. It was a high-profile event, and his absence would be noticed. But leaving Thomas alone with the conspirators now seemed unthinkable. "I'll cancel," Marcus said immediately. "No, Daddy. This might be our best chance to record them when they think they're safe." Eleanor nodded. "Thomas is right. If you suddenly change your routine, they might get suspicious. But what if Thomas wasn't alone? What if Sophia and I happened to be visiting?" "Would you do that?" Marcus asked gratefully. "Of course. Sophia loves spending time with Thomas, and I can monitor the recording equipment while staying out of sight." As they walked toward the parking area, Thomas slipped his hand into Marcus's. "Daddy, are you mad at me for keeping this secret for so long?" Marcus stopped walking and knelt down to face his son. "Thomas, you've been protecting our family in the only way you knew how. You've been braver than any 8-year-old should ever have to be. I could never be mad at you for that. But if I had told you sooner, if you had told me sooner, I might not have believed you," Marcus said honestly, "and Margaret and Dr. Peterson might have found a way to discredit you or claim you were confused. Sometimes secrets have to wait for exactly the right moment to be revealed." Sophia bounced over to them. "Besides, if you had talked sooner, you never would have met me, and I never would have learned about heart-talking." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from his son in 8 years. "Sophia's right. Some things happen exactly when they're supposed to." Didum. As they exchanged contact information and made final plans for tomorrow, Marcus realized that his life had been completely transformed in the space of a single morning. Not only had he discovered that his son could hear and speak, but he'd also uncovered a conspiracy that threatened their entire future. But for the first time in 8 years, Marcus felt hopeful. Thomas was no longer lost in silence, and together they were going to fight for what was rightfully theirs. The only question now was whether they could gather enough evidence before Margaret and Dr. Peterson realized their game was up. Dafisi, verse 5. Sunday morning arrived with an unseasonably cool breeze that Marcus took as a good omen. He stood in his kitchen, adjusting his golf attire, while Eleanor quietly installed the last of the recording devices. Thomas sat at the breakfast table, methodically eating his cereal, while Sophia drew pictures beside him. "The living room camera is positioned behind the bookshelf," Eleanor reported in a low voice. "The office device is in the picture frame on your desk. Both are voice-activated and will record directly to this remote server." She showed Marcus a small device. "You'll be able to access everything from your phone in real time." Marcus nodded, his stomach tight with anxiety. "Are you sure about this plan? If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Thomas said quietly, looking up from his cereal. "I've been watching them for 8 years, Daddy. I know exactly how they act when they think you're gone." Sophia looked up from her drawing, a surprisingly detailed sketch of the park where they'd met. "Thomas is really smart about watching people. He noticed things about them that even grown-ups missed." Elena checked her watch. "You need to leave in 10 minutes to maintain your normal schedule. Margaret Chen is expected at 11. Dr. Peterson at 11:30. Marcus knelt beside Thomas's chair. "Son, if you feel unsafe for even a second, you give Elena the signal we discussed, and she'll call the police immediately." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I remember, but Daddy, they're not dangerous people. They're just greedy people. There's a difference." "Sometimes greedy people become dangerous when they're cornered," Marcus warned. Elena placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I've handled situations like this before. Thomas and Sophia will be safe, I promise." At exactly 10:30, Marcus left for the country club, his mind churning with worry and anticipation. The charity tournament felt surreal, shaking hands with fellow businessmen, making small talk about handicaps and weather, all while knowing that the most important battle of his life was being fought in his living room. By 11:15, his phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "M has arrived. Recording active." Marcus excused himself from his foursome and found a quiet spot near the clubhouse where he could monitor the live feed from the recording devices. Through his earbuds, he could hear Margaret Chen's voice clearly as she entered his living room. "Thomas, sweetheart, how are you today?" Margaret's voice was syrupy sweet, the tone people use with very small children or pets. "Daddy's gone to play golf, so it's just us." Marcus watched Thomas on the hidden camera feed. His son sat perfectly still on the couch, staring ahead with the vacant expression he'd perfected over the years. But now Marcus could see the intelligence behind those eyes, the careful attention Thomas was paying to every word. "I brought some papers for Daddy to sign when he gets back," Margaret continued, settling into the armchair across from Thomas. "Important papers about your future, sweetheart. Papers that will make sure you're taken care of, even if Daddy can't do it anymore." Thomas remained motionless, but Marcus could see his hands tighten slightly in his lap. Dr. Peterson arrived precisely on schedule, his voice immediately recognizable as he greeted Margaret. "Any problems with the boy?" "None whatsoever. He's exactly as unresponsive as always." Marcus felt sick hearing them discuss his son as if he were an object rather than a person. "The competency hearing is set for tomorrow morning," Dr. Peterson continued. "Judge Harrison is known to be very conservative about these matters. With my medical evaluation and your documentation of the trust mismanagement, we should have guardianship transferred without issue." And Marcus suspects nothing? Nothing at all. He's so focused on finding a cure for the boy's deafness that he hasn't bothered to review the trust statements in months. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. They were right. He'd been so consumed with medical appointments and therapies that he'd neglected the financial oversight that was his responsibility as trustee. "What about the Wellington family?" Margaret asked. "Any pushback from Marcus's relatives?" His brother David asked some questions last month about Thomas's prognosis, but I assured him the boy would never recover. The Wellington side of the family has largely written Thomas off as a lost cause. Through the camera, Marcus could see Thomas flinch almost imperceptibly at these cruel words. "Perfect," Margaret said. "Once we have guardianship, Patricia and Robert can petition to redirect the trust assets as the designated secondary beneficiaries. The medical expenses alone will justify the transfer." "Speaking of medical expenses," Dr. Peterson said with a chuckle, "I trust my bills for the experimental therapy sessions have been processed." Margaret laughed. $40,000 for twice-weekly sessions with a non-verbal child, your most profitable patient by far." Marcus nearly choked. $40,000? Dr. Peterson had been billing the trust for services that were not only unnecessary, but completely fabricated. "The beauty of it is that no one questions medical expenses for a disabled child," Margaret continued. "I've been able to redirect nearly $200,000 in trust funds over the past 3 years, all under the guise of Thomas's care." $200,000. Marcus felt dizzy with rage and disbelief. "The offshore accounts are secure?" Dr. Peterson asked. "Completely. Even if someone eventually audits the trust, the money trail will be nearly impossible to follow." On the camera feed, Marcus watched Thomas slowly turn his head toward the kitchen, where Eleanor was hidden. It was such a subtle movement that Margaret and Dr. Peterson didn't notice, but Marcus could see his son's distress. "There is one small complication," Margaret said, her tone becoming more serious. "David Wellington called my office Friday asking about scheduling a meeting to review the trust documents." Marcus's heart leaped. His brother, the federal prosecutor, had mentioned nothing about this during their last conversation. "What did you tell him?" Dr. Peterson asked, sounding concerned for the first time. that Marcus handles all trust matters, and I couldn't discuss them without his presence. But David seemed persistent. Should we accelerate the timeline? No, we stick to the plan. After tomorrow's hearing, it won't matter what David Wellington suspects. We'll have legal guardianship, and the trust will be beyond Marcus's control. Marcus had heard enough. He quietly dialed David's number, stepping further away from the other golfers. "Marcus, how's the tournament?" David's familiar voice was reassuring. "David, I need you to listen very carefully," Marcus whispered urgently. "Thomas isn't deaf. He's been pretending for 8 years, and he's uncovered a massive conspiracy involving his trust fund." There was a long pause. "Marcus, are you feeling all right?" "I know how it sounds, but I have recordings, evidence, everything. Margaret Chen and Dr. Peterson have been stealing from Thomas's trust, and they're trying to have me declared an unfit guardian tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" "Marcus, there's no hearing scheduled for tomorrow. I would have been notified as—" David stopped mid-sentence. "Oh, God. They're doing this ex parte. What does that mean?" "It means they've convinced a judge to hear their petition without notifying you or giving you a chance to respond. Marcus, if they succeed, you could lose all parental rights to Thomas." The full scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about completely removing Marcus from Thomas's life so they could control both the boy and his inheritance. "What do we do?" Marcus asked. "Where are you right now?" "At the country club, but I have live recordings of Margaret and Dr. Peterson confessing to everything." "Send me everything immediately." "I'm calling the FBI Financial Crimes Unit and requesting an emergency injunction to stop tomorrow's hearing." Marcus ended the call and immediately began forwarding the audio files to David. Through his earbuds, he could hear the conversation in his living room growing more detailed and incriminating by the minute. But then Sophia's voice cut through the recording, clear and innocent. "Thomas, are you okay? You look sad." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Sophia wasn't supposed to interact with Thomas while Margaret and Dr. Peterson were there. On the camera feed, he watched both adults turn sharply toward the sound of Sophia's voice. "Who's there?" Margaret demanded, standing up abruptly. Eleanor appeared from the kitchen, looking perfectly calm. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize Thomas had visitors. I'm Elena Santos, the new housekeeper. This is my daughter Sophia." Marcus held his breath. Elena's quick thinking had potentially saved the situation. "Housekeeper?" Dr. Peterson questioned. "Marcus never mentioned hiring anyone new." "He hired me last week through an agency," Elena lied smoothly. "I was just tidying the kitchen while Sophia played with Thomas." Margaret and Dr. Peterson exchanged suspicious glances. "Does the child interact with Thomas regularly?" Margaret asked. "Oh no," Eleanor said with a dismissive wave. "Thomas doesn't respond to anyone. Sophia just likes to chatter at him. You know how children are." But then Thomas did something that changed everything. Perhaps it was hearing Sophia's concern for him, or perhaps it was the weight of 8 years of secrets finally becoming too heavy to bear. He looked directly at Margaret Chen and spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried perfectly through the recording device. "You're not going to steal my mama's money anymore." The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret and Dr. Peterson stood frozen in shock, while Eleanor quickly moved to position herself between the adults and the children. Through the camera, Marcus could see his son standing up from the couch, his small frame radiating a dignity and strength that took Marcus's breath away. "I heard everything," Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Every lie you told about me, every dollar you stole, every plan you made to take me away from my daddy." Margaret was the first to recover from the shock. "This is impossible. You're deaf. You can't—" "I was never deaf," Thomas said simply. "I just didn't want to talk anymore after Mama died. But I never stopped listening." Dr. Peterson pulled out his phone. "We need to leave." Now. But Elena stepped forward, revealing a badge that Marcus hadn't known she carried. Actually, gentlemen, you need to stay exactly where you are. Elena Santos, licensed private investigator. You're both under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. As sirens wailed in the distance, Marcus realized that his son had just delivered the performance of a lifetime. Not the performance of pretending to be deaf, but the performance of being brave enough to speak the truth when it mattered most. The boy who had hidden in silence for 8 years had finally found his voice at exactly the moment when it could save everything that mattered. 3 months later, Marcus sat on their familiar bench in Riverside Park, watching Thomas and Sophia play on the swings with pure joy radiating from both children. The transformation in his son was nothing short of miraculous, not just in his ability to speak, but in his confidence, his laughter, and his genuine happiness. The legal aftermath had been swift and decisive. Margaret Chen and Dr. Peterson were facing federal charges for trust fraud, conspiracy, and exploitation of a minor. David Wellington had managed to freeze all offshore accounts and recover most of the stolen money. Patricia and Robert had been removed as secondary beneficiaries of Thomas's trust, their involvement in the conspiracy making them ineligible for any inheritance. But the most important transformation wasn't financial, it was the relationship between father and son. "Daddy, watch this," Thomas called out, pumping his legs to make the swing go higher. His voice had grown stronger over the past 3 months, losing the rusty quality that had marked those first precious words. "I'm watching," Marcus called back, still marveling at the simple joy of having conversations with his son. Elena approached with 2 cups of coffee, settling beside Marcus on the bench. Their friendship had evolved naturally over the weeks of depositions and court proceedings. She'd refused any payment for her help, insisting that justice for Thomas was reward enough. "How are you doing with all of this?" she asked, gesturing toward the children. Marcus considered the question. "Some days I feel guilty about the lost years. All those times I could have tried harder to reach him, all those conversations we could have had. And other days? Other days, I think everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. If Thomas had started talking sooner, we never would have discovered Margaret and Dr. Peterson's fraud. And more importantly, Thomas learned something about himself during those silent years. He learned that he was strong enough to protect the people he loves, even at great personal cost." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Sophia keeps asking me if Thomas will ever need to be silent again. I think she's worried that speaking was just temporary for him." Marcus smiled, watching his son teach Sophia a new way to jump off the swing at the perfect moment. "Dr. Williams, our new therapist, says Thomas is one of the most emotionally resilient children she's ever worked with. He's processing 8 years of stored experiences and emotions, but he's doing it at his own pace, in his own way." "And the nightmares?" "Getting better. He still has them occasionally, dreams about that night Sarah died, but now he talks about them instead of carrying them alone." Sophia ran over to them, slightly out of breath from playing. "Mr. Marcus, Thomas wants to know if we can have a picnic here next Saturday for his birthday." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thomas's 9th birthday would be the first one where they could actually celebrate together with words and conversation. "Of course we can," Marcus said. "What kind of cake does he want?" Sophia grinned. "Chocolate with vanilla frosting, and he wants to invite David and his family and Dr. Williams and Mrs. Morrison from the dog walking." "That sounds perfect." Thomas jogged over, his cheeks flushed from running. "Daddy, can I ask you something private?" Elena and Sophia tactfully moved toward the playground, giving them space. "You can ask me anything, son." Thomas sat beside him on the bench, his expression serious. "Do you think Mama would be proud of me for finally talking?" Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. This question had been weighing on Thomas's mind for weeks, surfacing in various forms during their evening conversations. Thomas, your mama loved you exactly as you were when she was alive, and she would love you exactly as you are now. But yes, I think she would be incredibly proud of your courage, even though I was scared for so long, especially because you were scared. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. You protected our family for 8 years. That's the kind of bravery that makes parents proud. Thomas leaned against his father's side, a gesture that still felt precious and new. I dreamed about her last night, but it was a good dream this time. She was sitting in the garden behind our house, and she could hear me talking to her. What did you tell her? I told her about Sophia, and about how we caught the bad people, and about how you cry happy tears now instead of sad tears. Marcus wrapped his arm around his son, holding him close. What did she say back? She said she always knew I would find my voice when I was ready. And she said she's been listening to my heart talking all along, even when I couldn't use my regular voice. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Sophia attempt to teach Elena the proper technique for monkey bars. Daddy, can I tell you a secret? Always. Sometimes I still use heart-talking with Sophia. Not because I'm scared to use my regular voice, but because some feelings are too big for regular words. Marcus understood. There were still moments when words felt inadequate for the love and gratitude he felt toward his son, toward Elena and Sophia, toward the miraculous chain of events that had brought them all together. I think that's beautiful, Thomas. Heart-talking will always be special between you and Sophia. And between you and me too, Thomas added shyly. Sometimes when you hug me at bedtime, I can hear what you're thinking without you having to say it. Marcus smiled. What am I thinking right now? Thomas closed his eyes and concentrated, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're thinking that you love me more than all the money in the world, and that you're sorry it took us so long to really talk to each other, and that you're grateful for Sophia and Elena, and even for the bad people, because they helped us find each other again. Marcus stared at his son in amazement. How did you... Heart-talking, Thomas said simply. I'm pretty good at it now. Elena and Sophia returned, both slightly winded from their playground adventure. Time to head home? Elena asked. Actually, Marcus said, standing up and brushing off his jeans, I was hoping you both might join us for dinner tonight. Thomas has been practicing a new recipe he wants to share. Thomas beamed with pride. Mama's spaghetti and meatballs. I found the recipe in her cookbook, and I've been learning to read it out loud. Sophia clapped her hands together. I love spaghetti, and I can help set the table. As they walked toward the parking area, Thomas slipped his hand into Marcus's. Daddy, do you think we'll keep coming to this park even when I'm all grown up? I hope so. This place will always be special to us. Because this is where I found my voice again? Because this is where our real story began, Marcus corrected gently. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Sophia says every ending is really just a beginning in disguise. Marcus looked over at the remarkable little girl who had changed their lives simply by seeing past appearances to the truth underneath. Sophia's a very wise young lady. She says when she grows up, she wants to help other kids who are hiding secrets that are too heavy to carry alone. Elena smiled. I think she'd be excellent at that. As they reached their cars, Thomas turned back for one last look at the park. The late afternoon sun was casting golden light through the trees, making the whole scene look almost magical. Thank you, Riverside Park, Thomas said quietly. What are you thanking it for? Sophia asked. For being the place where I learned that secrets don't have to be scary forever. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right person to help you share them. Marcus felt his heart swell with love and pride as he watched his son. No longer silent, no longer afraid, no longer carrying the weight of the world on his small shoulders. Thomas had found his voice, but more importantly, he'd found himself. The 8-year silence was over, but the conversations between father and son were just beginning, and Marcus intended to treasure every single word for the rest of his life. As they drove home together, Thomas chattering excitedly about the dinner he was going to prepare, Marcus realized that some miracles don't announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress who sees the truth that everyone else has missed. And sometimes the greatest gift isn't finding your voice. It's finding people who were always listening for it, even in the silence. Thomas, now 11 years old, was running through the same park where everything had changed. This time, however, he wasn't running away. He was running towards something. His sneakers made a rhythmic sound on the asphalt, a sound that Marcus had learned to love because it meant his son was no longer hiding from the world. "Sophia, Elena!" he shouted, waving to the two familiar figures on the bench. "Dad said we have a surprise." Marcus appeared right behind him, carrying an elaborate picnic basket and smiling in that way he had only learned to smile after his son began speaking again. In the past 2 years, that smile had become his default expression. He wore a light blue shirt, Thomas's favorite, and carried a small package in his pocket that made his heart beat faster. "What's the surprise?" Sophia asked, bouncing with curiosity. Now 9 years old, she had grown several inches, but her vibrant personality remained exactly the same. Her hair was tied in 2 braids decorated with colorful ribbons. Elena smiled, watching her daughter's excitement. In the past 2 years, she had become a constant presence in Marcus and Thomas's life. Their Sunday visits to the park had transformed into family dinners, movie nights, and countless conversations about everything and nothing. She wore a soft green dress that Marcus had secretly thought looked perfect on her. Thomas looked at his father, who nodded. The boy had grown not just physically, but emotionally. His confidence had flourished in extraordinary ways. He still had quiet moments. He always would, but now they were conscious choices, not refugees from fear. "Elena," Thomas began, formal as he always became when something was important, "my dad wanted to ask if you would like to marry him." The silence that followed was completely different from those 8 years of forced silence. This was the silence of happy surprise, of love finding its way, of dreams aligning with reality. Elena covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears. For months she had hoped for this moment, dreamed of it, but had never dared imagine that Thomas would be the one to ask the initial question. Marcus approached and knelt in the same spot where, 2 years earlier, Thomas had spoken his first words to an unknown little girl in a yellow dress. His knees touched the slightly damp grass, but he didn't even notice. "I know we started as strangers in a park," Marcus said, his voice slightly trembling, "but you taught us that the best families are the ones we choose. Elena, you brought light back into our lives. You gave me my son back, and gave Thomas a sister he never knew he needed." He pulled the small package from his pocket, revealing a navy blue velvet box. "You completed us in a way I didn't even know something was missing. Will you marry us? All of us?" "And I already chose you," Elena replied, tears flowing freely down her face. "A long time ago. Since that first day when Thomas looked at me and I knew something special was happening." Thomas and Sophia hugged each other, shouting with joy. Sophia began jumping in place, her braids swinging wildly. "I'm going to have a real brother," she screamed, "and I'm going to have a real sister." Thomas responded, his voice filled with pure happiness that made Marcus's heart overflow. Elena extended her left hand, trembling slightly, as Marcus slid the ring, a simple but elegant solitaire that had belonged to Sarah's mother, onto her finger. He had talked to Thomas about this, and his son had insisted that Sarah would be happy knowing the ring was helping to create a new family. "Now we're officially a heart-talking family," Sophia announced, using the special term she and Thomas had created. "Forever," Thomas agreed, and then added something that surprised everyone. "Mom would be happy. I dreamed about her last week, and she said she was waiting for this day." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. Thomas rarely spoke about Sarah spontaneously, but when he did, it was always with a wisdom that impressed everyone. They set up their picnic in the same spot where they had first met. Elena had prepared elaborate sandwiches, Marcus had brought fruits and juices, and the children had insisted on including homemade cookies they had made together the night before. While they ate, Thomas talked about his progress at school. He'd joined the chess club and was considering trying out for the debate team next year. Sophia talked about her dance classes and her science project on animal communication. "You know," said Thomas, thoughtfully biting his sandwich, "I was thinking about how we were before. Not just me being silent, but all of us being separate." "What do you mean?" Elena asked gently. "Well, Dad was sad but pretending not to be. I was scared but pretending not to be. Sophia was looking for someone to understand her, and you, Elena, were taking care of everyone except yourself." Marcus was impressed by his son's perception. "And now? Now we're honest with each other. When I'm sad, I say so. When Dad is worried, he talks to us about it. When Sophia has a crazy idea, she shares it." Thomas smiled. "And when Elena needs help, she lets us help her too." "That's very profound, my love," Elena said, running her hand through Thomas's hair with the maternal affection that had developed naturally. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they slowly packed up their things, no one wanting the perfect moment to end. "Can I make a suggestion?" Thomas said as they were walking back to the cars. "Of course," Marcus replied. "That we get married here, in the park, where it all began." Sophia clapped her hands. "Yes, and I can be the maid of honor." "And can I be the best man?" Thomas asked shyly. Marcus and Elena looked at each other over the children's heads. "I think that would be perfect," Elena said. There, on the bench where a boy had found his voice and a father had found his son again, 4 people discovered that sometimes the most beautiful endings are just new beginnings in disguise. As they walked to the parking lot, Marcus realized that he never again needed to wonder if Thomas was okay. Now he simply asked, and his son always answered, not just with words, but with smiles, hugs, and all the confidence of a child who knew he was deeply loved. 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony at Riverside Park, with David Wellington as the officiant and a small crowd of friends and family watching, Marcus and Elena were married, while Thomas and Sophia stood beside them, holding the rings and smiling as if they had orchestrated everything from the beginning. The silence had ended forever. The conversation was just beginning. If you want part 2 of this story, leave it in the comments.